Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the August 20th, 2013 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It is my privilege to call this meeting to order. If you've not already done so, there are copies of our agenda on either side of the room. Please feel free to pick one up and follow along with our proceedings. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment, both with respect to items on our agenda as well as items of a general nature, and that will be item 4 when we get to it. It is our custom to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, so at this point in time I would ask that everyone please rise and join us in reciting the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much for that. That brings us to item 2. This is the time when I ask our fine village clerk, April Holden, to please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Olson?
Here.
Commissioner Rankin?
Here.
Commissioner Barnett?
Here.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Here.
Commissioner Durkin?
Here.
Commissioner Mayor Tully?
Here to all 3.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It brings us to item 3, minutes of council meetings. We have one set of minutes from a prior meeting on April 13, 2013 to review and consider and approve. Are there any changes, questions, corrections, or comments from any members of the village council with respect to those minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Those minutes have been approved. Thank you. It brings us to item 4, which is a segment of the meeting when we entertain comments of a general nature. These are questions and comments of a general nature with respect to items that are not appearing on our agenda tonight. So if anyone in the audience has a question or a comment of a general nature, the protocol is to please come down to the podium, give us your name and address, and we would welcome hearing from you. Are there any questions or comments of a general nature? And while Mr. Waldeck is on his way to the podium, I'm just going to go out and embarrass Dr. Cremascoli for being in the audience here. Welcome to the Superintendent of District 58. Thank you for being here tonight. Good evening, Mr. Waldeck.
Good evening. William Waldeck, 1409 Willard Place in Downers Grove. See, you can teach an old dog new tricks. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Based on the article, How Seniors Get Stuck at Home with No Transit Options, that was published in June 2011, according to the AARP, 88% of seniors want to stay in their own homes as long as they can. These homes are in auto-dependent suburbs like Downers Grove. That's where most baby boomers grew up in the post-war era, and that's where most of them have stayed, even as the largest and longest living generation ever enters its golden years. More than 20% of the seniors aged 65 and up do not drive at all. In the spread out transit-poor communities, including Downers Grove, where many of them live, seniors who don't drive miss out on countless opportunities, according to the report by the Transportation for America called Aging in Place, Stuck Without Options. Absent access to affordable travel options, seniors face isolation, a reduced quality of life, and possible economic hardship. A 2004 study found that seniors aged 65 and older who no longer drive make 15% fewer trips to the doctor, 59% fewer trips to shop or eat out, and 65% fewer trips to visit friends and family, and that's compared to people who drive of the same age. John Robert Smith, who's a former mayor of Meridian, Mississippi, and co-chair of Transportation for America, said, "My generation grew up and reared our children in communities that, for the first time in human history, were built on the assumption that everyone would be able to drive an automobile." He went on to say that when seniors can't get out, the local economy suffers too. He quotes, "Retirees bring their retirement funds into your communities, deposit them in your banks, and they support your school systems. But they don't make demands on your school system. They don't put children in the school system. They are law-abiding, good citizens, so they don't have that impact on your police department. They're just an all-around benefit and plus for your community." End of quote. Even seniors who can still drive might feel nervous driving after dark, or that their reflexes aren't what they used to be. Note that 2 weeks ago, a senior appeared before this council, and if you paid attention, you would have noted that she said she needed the transportation program to get to her MRI. Needed. Note also that she said that you don't want her driving. As a matter of fact, you don't want me driving. How many seniors and disabled are driving our streets and should not be? Our transportation subsidy helps our isolated seniors reach services. These seniors help build our streets, and they need a little help in return for all they've done, all they do, and all they will do for our community. So please restore the cuts you made to the transportation subsidy system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waldeck. Appreciate your comments. Other questions or comments of a general nature from any members of the audience? Hearing none, that brings us to council member reports of any items of interest to the community. We'll start with Commissioner Jose.
I have no report, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Barnett.
No report, Mayor.
Commissioner Rankin.
I mentioned it last week, but I did want to remind everyone there's still time to sign up for the Grove Foundation golf outing. It's on September 7th. Sorry, couldn't remember. September 7th. We did sell out last year. Tickets are available on www.thegrovefoundation.org.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Olson.
Yeah, I just wanted to announce a 5K, which is my standard. But St. Mary of Goshen is having a 5K this Saturday at 8 a.m. You can find it on more information on their website, and I would encourage folks to attend, support one of our local churches, and I'll be there running. So looking forward to seeing everyone there.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Durkin.
Yeah, I don't really have a report. I do have a question, though. Maybe staff could get a response to us. In regards to the pedestrian crossings at 63rd and Springside, I noticed a number of students, athletes, I believe, were training this morning. Can we get an update on a pedestrian crossing light there, which I discussed and brought up when we talked about the, what do you call it? The last report we just accepted.
Plan.
Yeah, that whole plan. But anyway, if you can get a report out on that, and then also with construction, and I saw that they laid a ADA acceptable path for crossing Main Street just north of Oxford. If there's an update regarding a pedestrian crossing over there, since that's the way the El Sierra subdivision walks over to South High, I'd appreciate it.
Will do.
Thank you so much, and that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Neustadt.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to note that the Downers Grove Police Department was recognized as a traffic safety leader. The police department received this recognition in the 2012 Illinois Traffic Challenge as the top agency in the state for agencies with 66 to 100 sworn officers. In addition, the department received the 2012 Pedestrian and Bike Safety Award, which recognizes law enforcement agencies for their efforts in bicycle and pedestrian education. Traffic is one of the highest priorities in Downers Grove for our police department. I think they do a great job. We have a special traffic division that is out there protecting our roads and our drivers and pedestrians and bicyclists. So great job to the Downers Grove Police Department, and Chief Porter is actually going to go down to receive the award in Tinley Park, but there's a couple statistics here. There were no traffic-related deaths in Downers Grove in 2012, and seatbelt use is up in Downers Grove, which is great. So just wanted to report that out to everybody listening and here in the audience. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Two things from my standpoint. One, and we have a special guest in addition to Dr. Cremascoli. I would be disowned if I didn't point out that we have two very special guests here tonight. I'm very pleased to point out that my parents are here tonight in a rare appearance, but it's always good to see you. Thank you for being here tonight. Make sure that on the way home you do lots of shopping along downtown Downers Grove. That would be greatly appreciated. So good to see you. Thank you for being here tonight. On a much more somber note, I think most of us know that over the weekend we lost a very dear friend. Mickey Beckman passed, losing a long struggle with her ailments. And of course, not only was Mickey in her own right a huge asset to this community that affected many of us and many institutions in a very positive way, but she was also the spouse of one of our former colleagues, Bruce Beckman, who served on this dais for 4 years as a village commissioner, and then before that for many years on the District 99 school board. And so we have much to thank Mickey for. Her life made all of ours much better. We were very saddened by her passing, and our thoughts and prayers, I know I speak for all my colleagues and the entire village when I say our thoughts and prayers are with Bruce and his family on the passing of Mickey. And we thank her for sharing Bruce with us for the time that he served this community so well for many years. So that's all I have on my report. Moving then to item 6, public hearings. We have no public hearings tonight. So that brings us to item 7, our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to any of the items on the consent agenda? Hearing none, any questions or comments from any members of the village council with respect to any items on the consent agenda? Hearing none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, the consent agenda passes unanimously. That brings us to item 8, our active agenda. We have 2 items on our active agenda. The first one is 8A. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance amending stormwater and floodplain provisions?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the audience? Any questions or comments from members of the village council? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, the matter passes unanimously, and now I'm going to exercise some executive privilege. Commissioner Durkin, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I did have a comment. I'm sorry, I didn't wave high enough for you. And I do support this, evidently by my vote, but I do have a comment I want to make out. I said, in reference to the last motion that just passed, I support the stormwater utility as a way to fund the stormwater management system with fees based on the impact to the system. All properties contribute to the system, and all properties pay for the system. I am sympathetic to the church's concern that the village has reduced spending on social services and now depends more heavily on the churches to provide these services. I would like to find a way to support or compensate the churches and the not-for-profits for their role in providing.
This one, we'll talk to the comment.
Yeah, is that, what did I just, I messed up.
It's all right. It took me a minute to figure it out. Do you want to hold that until we get to that point of the agenda? I
Do we reverse and re-edit?
Sorry. Okay, Michelle, take 2.
Sorry.
No, don't worry. It took me a moment there.
Yeah,
Took me a moment there to catch up with you. I think your comment is directed to an item that's coming up.
Yeah, it is.
Okay,
All right.
we'll, if you don't mind, we'll address it then.
All right.
Thank you. Well, then that brings us to item 8B as in boy.
Sorry.
No worries. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance to repeal the Ogden Avenue Site Improvement Strategy Program?
Mayor Tully, I move to adopt an ordinance repealing the Ogden Avenue Site Improvement Strategy Program, OASIS, as presented.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Questions or comments from members of the village council? Commissioner Rankin?
I just wanted to point out that Michael Kessa had clarified last week that existing business owners would still be possibly eligible for grants to change their facade if necessary, and that this change would actually provide maybe a bit more flexibility for the TIF Avenue, the TIF funding, so Ogden Avenue funding. So I am going to support it, but I meant to mention that last time, and I really didn't have an opportunity, so thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from members of the council? My comment is twofold. First, I wanted to thank staff for following up on the comments that were made last week when this was workshopped, and I appreciate the information that actually the Economic Development Corporation has contacted all the members of the OASIS team to inform them of this potential council action. And staff revised the language in the ordinance based on council direction to, I think, make it more clear that it's not so much that OASIS is going away as it is being absorbed as part of a larger redevelopment program that pre-existed OASIS, and that it was very successful. I think it raised awareness of the type of redevelopment projects that can be done along Ogden Avenue and the tools that are available, and that my understanding is the EDC will continue to do that with as much fervor as it always did before. So I appreciate the change in the language of the ordinance, the repeal ordinance, that would reflect that reality. My only concern continues to be whether or not we have sufficiently identified what the response would be to a very simple question if it was made by, for example, a business owner along Ogden Avenue, the Chamber of Commerce, or someone else, as to, okay, so that you repealed OASIS. I have something I'd like to do. How do I go about doing that? And I'm sure that there are answers to that question, and I'm sure that they're well stated, but I do recall last time that we were talking about making sure that we had our ducks in a row in order to respond to that question appropriately. I'm still not sure that we do. So I have a feeling that there may not be a lot of support for this, but it'd still be my preference to entertain a motion to table this for a date certain, just a couple of weeks, because I would like to see, in addition to this green sheet, something that literally lays out what that answer is. So that when the phone is picked up by someone and says, okay, I read in the paper you repealed OASIS, hey, I'd like to do something in Ogden Avenue, is it just called Michael Casa, is it just called Dave Fieldman, what is it? And normally we have our, if a business runs a promotion, and it's a successful promotion, and it raises brand awareness and increases sales, does all the things that you want to do through a promotion, and then that promotion ends, there's usually another promotion that's in place, ready to go to pick up the slack. And my only concern is that I'm not quite convinced that we have that from a promotional branding standpoint ready to go. I have no doubt the tools are in place. That's not the point. That's my only question. And so I can't make the motion, but I would ask if any of my colleagues would be interested in making such a motion. And literally I'm talking about making it to a date certain so we can get the specific concern that I'm expressing ironed out. I don't think it would take a lot of work. I don't think it would take a lot of time. I just don't think we're there yet. And I would just add to the background of it, there is obviously no rush to eliminate or to repeal OASIS. As I understand it from our discussion last time, we're not accepting any applications anyway, so it's not as though there's anyone out there that's hanging around waiting for some kind of decision. So I would simply share that with my colleagues for their consideration.
Is it us that doesn't know about being prepared? Are you guys really prepared and we just don't know it?
We're prepared.
So this would be like a week-long thing, right? I mean, we don't have a meeting next week, so we're talking about first week of September.
Literally minutes of work, yes. We just have to take down what Michael and I already have in our heads and literally write it down and then get it to Mr. Kozlowski to...
So you guys are likely to be rolling on this thing in a day or two?
Exactly.
Okay. All right. With that in mind, I have more confidence and not worried about it, Mayor.
Well, I guess the protocol would be, is there a motion, and then we can entertain comments on it. If not, then we don't need to do anything else. We can take a roll call.
I'm willing to make the motion.
Well, the motion would be to table this to a date certain, and it would be to the next meeting as far as I'm concerned. All right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, any discussion?
Well, I would just say that I understand what you're saying because I've been on the opposite end. I've been someone who's trying to speak to a village and not knowing what those expectations are, and that's difficult to navigate for the staff person as well as the person who's asking. But I do understand that it seems that staff has things kind of rolling in place, so I don't know if it's necessary.
Mayor,
I'm sorry, Commissioner Newsted?
I'd be concerned that whatever we put down on paper is ideas and tools in the toolbox, but I think each individual application or touch with a business for redevelopment or development is going to be completely unique and singular compared to what may be out there and even what was potentially out there in OASIS. So while I understand the idea of trying to wait to get something kind of the next step, but I think the next step is already here. It's whatever business A, B, or C wants to come in, if they've got a question, we have on our staff here, and then as well as the EDC, our partner, to offer whatever they may need. So I guess I'm asking, Mayor, are you looking for a set of tools or a list of what we can or can't do as far as redevelopment and development, or are you just, are the OASIS Part 2 minus the name maybe, and how we would handle an inquiry, where it goes, who gets the call, how it gets delivered? That seems very operational, whereas I think the will of the council is go out, redevelop, and develop our parcels in the entire village, not just on Ogden. You know, Ogden, we have
Sure.
a TIF, obviously, so there's opportunities there.
To answer your question, I think I agree with you 100%. The operational part, it not only is there, it's not going to be any different. It's what it was yesterday will be the same tomorrow. That's not my concern. My concern was a perception, which is one that I've heard from the community, And again, I'm not suggesting that thousands of people have contacted me about this, but that there's a perception that perhaps, okay, this is going away, what's next? And as we all know, perception is a big deal. And so what's the next promotion is my point. And it sounds like our comments from last week were taken to heart, and there is another promotion, and if it's really out in days, then perhaps Commissioner Barnett's right, we don't need to do this. And I suspect that if we had a meeting next week, it probably would be less of an issue because it would all be done and then we could just handle it next week. If the concern is delaying this action until the first meeting in September, again, my view is what is the rush? There certainly isn't one. There's no compelling reason to move. I'm not suggesting inactivity. Just I think since the perception has been expressed that making sure that the next promotion is already up and has been received, if you will, might be worth our while since there is no pressing urgency. That's my only point. And again, if the will of the council is, it sounds to me like if we move on to the next step and it's going to happen in 48 hours, 72 hours, there's no gap that anyone's going to fall through, so be it. It's just a suggestion based on some communications I've had and some perceptions that I've perceived in the community. Commissioner Olson and then Commissioner Barnett.
I'd just like to note, my understanding is that if we are, the only reason we may be tabling this item would be so we can extend some time so we can put something out on a website or a statement together from Michael Casa, village manager. We can do that whether it's repealed or not. We can still do that. And if my sense is, I don't know of any discussion subsequent to this that needs to happen for any of us, for any of my colleagues that at least I'm aware of. So I don't see any reason to table this at this time. I say, in my opinion, we move forward. Let's vote on this item and then let the village manager and economic development director work on some messaging. I think that seems a reasonable impact. Unless there's any of my colleagues would like some additional time to consider this, then I'd certainly be happy to allow them some additional time. But my understanding is that folks are pretty well determined what their thoughts are on this proposal. So I'd be in favor of moving forward and unless somebody needs additional time or additional information. So, thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Barnett.
Thanks, Mayor. First of all, I agree with much of what David just said, but also maybe I'm not understanding. So bear with me, Mayor, if I'm missing your point. My understanding of where we are here is that we're going to stop this program, which basically puts Ogden Avenue and the TIF funds and the development process right back into the same drawer it was in 4 or 5 years ago, as well as the same process and structure that any other property outside of Ogden Avenue would have, whether it be downtown or elsewhere, which is that somebody comes to the village and says, I'd like to do something, and a conversation ensues. And I think we're having those conversations successfully day in and day out, inside or outside the TIF, and I guess I don't see, there is no next promotion in my mind. There's no particular unique set of criteria that any of us have considered ought to be put in place, or even set of guidelines or suggestions for potential developers. That's a whole nother conversation, as though there were a replacement for this program. In my understanding, it has the potential to just end the program and specifically not replace it. I think the intent is to not replace it. And so I'm missing perhaps your goal. There isn't a new promotion coming. There's back into the standard EDC, Community Development Department, day in and day out activities that would be going on.
There's always a new promotion. When Coke rolled out new Coke, there was a promotion. When they rolled it back, there was a promotion. There's always an opportunity for promotion. And that's all I'm saying. And if it sounds like there actually is one, and maybe, again, I'm using promotion as a metaphor, but it's the next message, it's the next, okay, take advantage, do more in Downers Grove, Ogden Avenue, even more, bigger, better, stronger, close whiter, that kind of thing. The other point is that the actual monetary part of this, which I do agree, is that the $250,000 that would otherwise be budgeted for Oasis project should no longer be segregated. I don't think I've heard anybody disagree with that. Yeah. That's not going to happen until we get down to our budget anyway. So that's, again, why I'm saying there's no rush to do that. It's not as though if we don't act on this tonight, $250,000 is going to be parked somewhere and unavailable for a development project. To your point, that's going to go on as it always has. Again, it's simply a question I put out to the council. If people aren't concerned about this, then we can deny the motion to table and we can vote on the other motion. But I simply raised it as something that was brought to my attention. Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree that there's really not a whole lot changing in terms of, we want redevelopment on Ogden Avenue. The Oasis program is going away, but that doesn't mean that everything is going away. So I don't see that there's a harm necessarily in waiting 14 days. That's not going to stop the village from taking information from folks who want to engage in a redevelopment project, and that's not going to stop Michael Kasser or Dave Fieldman from going out and talking with folks who they would like to see become interested in a redevelopment project on Ogden Avenue. So from my point of view, if there's messaging that it seems needs to be done, let's make sure that the horse is in front of the cart, get the messaging done, and repeal this in 14 days. If the council feels otherwise, I've got no problem with that. But I don't see why we shouldn't have the message ready to go and be able to tell people this is who you want to contact, and these are the things that we can do for you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other comments on the motion to table? Hearing none. I think then we take a vote on the motion to table, and then a vote on the motion if that doesn't pass. Okay, we've got to get our procedure correct here. So may I have a roll call on the motion to table?
Motion to table. Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Nay.
Commissioner Rankin?
Nay.
Commissioner Barnett?
Nay.
Commissioner Newstead?
Nay.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, although it's already failed. Now, may we, so the motion to table to a date certain fails. Can I have a roll call on the motion itself, please?
The motion itself. Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. That motion passes unanimously. The repeal has gone forward. That brings us to the end of our active agenda, and I want to thank everyone for considering that. It was a good discussion. Brings us to the end of our active agenda. It brings us to item 9 on our agenda, which is our first reading. Custom dictates that we turn over the first reading part of our agenda, which is our workshop, where we entertain matters for discussion and consideration and a vote for a potential later point in time. Custom dictates that we turn this portion of the meeting over to village staff for presentation. Village Manager David Fieldman.
I'm going to deviate from custom tonight because I'm going to introduce David Hyder from MFSG, who was not one of our staff members, but one of our trusted consultants who helped us create the stormwater utility. And he's here tonight to help us present and discuss the performance of the stormwater utility to date. And then the actual item as it appears is an ordinance considering amendments to the stormwater utility provisions. And so with that, here is David Hyder.
Well, good evening, Mayor, Council. It's good to see everybody. It's good to see some familiar faces and some new faces on the Council. I'm really excited about the opportunity to talk about the stormwater utility tonight. Oftentimes, I should say most times in my line of work, I'm the bearer of bad news, and then I'm telling the community they need to raise fees because their infrastructure is falling apart, or raise rates because they're not selling enough water, or what it may be. But I can say this evening that I have a positive message, and I look forward to going over it with you. The key points that we want to discuss this evening and want to leave with you is first off that the utility has successfully been launched. The village is achieving the benefits of the stormwater utility, and that utility is performing per budget and per plan, almost to the T. There's some minor changes to the ordinance that are suggested, and we want to talk about adjustments to the fees as part of the decision process that would take place during the budget process this upcoming year. And then finally, just want to talk about how the village has been recognized as a leader in stormwater management. So first off, in terms of the stormwater utility creation and launch, the utility was successfully launched in January of this year. So you're essentially 8 months into operations. You've billed through 8 cycles. You've billed the north side 4 times and the south side 4 times. And based upon our review and the feedback that we've received, we can undoubtedly say that the stormwater utility is meeting and in most cases exceeding our expectations. But that's largely due to the extensive planning and the public engagement process that took place. The village staff provided a tremendous amount of work to make sure that the appropriate items were in place, that the appropriate planning was in place to successfully launch the utility. And in fact, the village has been talking about a utility and discussing the concept for about 10 years. Back in 2003, the concept was first discussed, and it was discussed from 2003 to 2005. Then subsequent to that, there were several planning documents that were developed essentially the needs for the stormwater system. Those were developed in 2005 and 2008. And those were the master plan and the capital improvement plans for the stormwater system. So subsequent to that, you identified the stormwater utility as a solution to fund the stormwater system as part of the 2009-10 long-range financial plan. And as an outpouring of that, you decided to initiate a feasibility study in 2009, and that's where our firm, MFSG, was brought on board. We completed the feasibility study, looked at the necessary steps to create a utility, and ultimately decided that it would be feasible for the village to implement a stormwater utility. And following that, ultimately the stormwater utility was approved, and a significant public engagement effort took place, as well as all of the village staff time that was required to make sure that all of the pieces were in place. So that's the background and the launch. Just want to refresh your memory in terms of some of the benefits of the stormwater utility, and there's really 5 key benefits. The first is that there's a direct relationship between the fee and the system impact. It's more equitable, it's more sustainable, it's transparent and accountable, and there's increased awareness. So going through each of those, there's now a direct relationship between the fee and the system impact, which provides more equity. It's more equitable. These stormwater fees are based on the property's amount of impervious area, and therefore the amount of runoff that your property generates is directly correlated to your impact on the stormwater system. Using this approach spreads the cost of the stormwater system throughout the entire community. Everybody who contributes pays, and anybody who contributes stormwater pays based upon how much runoff pays based on how much they're contributing. And to drive that home a little bit more, just wanted to show you how you used to recover or generate revenues for the stormwater system and how you do today. So on the left-hand side, this is how you used to recover revenues or generate them. This is using the property tax approach. So about a little over 76% of your revenues for the stormwater system came from residential property class. A little over 20% came from commercial. You didn't generate any revenue from tax exempt because they don't pay property taxes. And then industrial was contributing about 3%. And when you compare that to the amount of impervious area on each of these property classes, you can see the inequity that used to be in place, as about 50% of the impervious area is on the residential properties, 33.2% is on commercial, tax exempt account for about 9%, and industrial 7.8%. So the pie chart to the right is now how you generate revenues to fund the stormwater system. 50% is coming from residential, 33% commercial, and so on. And that right there really sums up the whole equity issue, and one of the key benefits that the village is achieving having a stormwater utility. I see somebody taking notes. I don't want to switch to the next one. Are you ready? Okay. Another benefit is it's more sustainable. You now have a dependable revenue stream, which Stan will talk about in a moment. It's very dependable. And what this allows you to do is proactive management of the system. And when you can proactively manage the system, it results in lower life cycle costs. You're not reactively managing. You're not putting out fires. And when you can do that, you have long-term sustainability of the system. This funding source is not subject to competing needs. So it's directly funding stormwater. Can't be deviated anywhere else or diverted anywhere else. So it's certainly more sustainable. It's transparent and fiscally accountable. The fees demonstrate the true cost of providing the stormwater management within the village. And those fees are driven by the level of service and needs of the system. So when you go through the budget process, then you look at what the fee should be, it'll be very obvious to the community, okay, these are the costs that we're gonna recover from the fee. And it's very much in the public's, very much transparent. And again, fees are exclusively used for stormwater needs. And the final benefit is increased awareness. The fees bring the stormwater services to the forefront as a vital service, provides an opportunity for education, and it motivates on-site stormwater management. These pictures here are 2 rain gardens that have been installed since the stormwater utility was put in place. These rain gardens were partially funded through incentives, through the incentives program as part of the stormwater utility. A couple more pictures. The top here is a green roof, which again is an on-site stormwater management activity. They received an incentive as a result of having that green roof. And then down the bottom picture is the hospital's stormwater management. And really they're going through the process of naturalizing that property, and over time they will be essentially eligible for a credit for the activities that they're taking place on their property. And lastly, in terms of public awareness, this is just a snapshot of the various platforms and then the reach in terms of the activities that were involved prior to the implementation of the stormwater utility, and then for the 2 months once it was up and running. And you can see the tremendous public outreach that took place, the various platforms, and ultimately this resulted in 250,000 impressions. So in terms of the messaging being sent out 250,000 times, that's a tremendous amount of public outreach. And if you think about it, if you hadn't gone through this stormwater utility, the implementation, this would still be somewhat of a hidden issue within the village. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stan to talk about the financial and operational performance.
Good evening, Mr. Balicki.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you, Dave. As Dave mentioned, I'll talk a little bit about the financial and operational performance that we've seen on the utility over the past 8 months, or seven and a half, as well as a few minor changes to the ordinance that are being proposed this evening. You can see from this bar chart that the revenues are tracking almost identically to the budget for 2013, and in fact the net revenues for the stormwater utility for 2013 right now will be within 1% of the budget for this year. This slide gives a little bit more of a detailed financial summary of what we're seeing in the utility through August. And you can see that the gross revenues are projected to be a bit lower, but also the credits and incentives are a bit lower than what was budgeted as well, and that's what's resulting in the net stormwater revenues essentially being right there at budget for this year. With respect to credits, incentives, and appeals, as Dave mentioned, we've been through 8 billing cycles, 4 on the south side and 4 on the north side of the village. There's 7 parcel owners receiving stormwater credits right now. We've issued 197 stormwater incentives. There have been 20 parcel owners that have consolidated parcels in order to reduce their overall stormwater fee. And there have been 4 parcel owners that have made appeals to the Stormwater and Floodplain Oversight Committee, all of which were not approved by the committee in their review. Just a couple of minor operational issues that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail here in the coming slides. Just a few definitions that could use a little bit in terms of clarification, as well as the bases for appeal and the burden of proof with respect to the appeals process. Taking a look at those in a little bit more detail, the definition changes revolve around a couple of areas. The definition of impervious area is proposed to be amended to specifically include overhangs and eaves of rooftops, as well as bricks or concrete pavers, unless those are part of a permeable pavement system. The stormwater system definition is proposed to be amended to include creeks, which was not in the original one, Also clarifies the system is located within the corporate limits of the village. Three changes with respect to the appeals process. Clarifies that parcel owners may base their appeal on 4 categories that include the classification of a parcel, the calculation of the impervious area, calculation of the fee, and a denial of a credit or incentive application. It also establishes that the property owner has the burden of proof in the appeals process, and it clarifies the process and timeline for appealing the stormwater administrator's decision to the village manager. At this point, I'll turn over the rest of the presentation to Dave to talk about fee adjustments and...
Before we move on, I just did want to put in perspective the fact that your budget's going to come in within 1% of your revenues are going to come in with 1% of the budget is pretty phenomenal. We see utilities that have been established for 20 years that don't come, that close to the projection. So that just demonstrates how successful the utility has been. Do want to talk about fee adjustments. And if you remember, as part of our feasibility study, we developed a recommended level of service, which is essentially recommended funding and expenditures within the stormwater utility. And in order to meet that recommended level of service, you would need to adjust fees in the coming years going forward. But I want to emphasize that that's really an annual decision. It's the village council decision to make on an annual basis. And our recommendation is that you consider adjustment to the fees as part of the 2014 budget process. At which time you'd be presented with the capital and maintenance expenditures for the stormwater system. The recommendations of the final April 2013 storm report would be available at that time, and any bearing that would have on the fee adjustments. And then the adjustments can be made when the other fees are adjusted. So just like you consider water on an annual basis or other utilities, we're recommending that the same process be used for the stormwater fees. And the last topic is just recognition. The village has been recognized for its efforts in its stormwater utility. Specifically, it received the 2013 Environmental Appreciation Award from the Conservation Foundation for implementing the stormwater utility. So that should be acknowledged within the community, as I think it has. The village staff have also been asked to speak at various engagements with the American Public Works Association, the Conservation Foundation, DuPage County, and industry seminars in stormwater regulation. So there's been quite a bit of feedback from the community in terms of the stormwater utility. And I just wanted to speak from our personal experience. We do these studies all over the country, and with water and sewer and stormwater. And I can say that without a doubt, in terms of the studies that I've been involved with, this is the one that I've gotten the most feedback from other communities and from other industry experts, stormwater consultants and things like that. I've had several communities in suburban Chicago call us up and ask us, how did you do it? What did Downers Grove do? We want to use them as a model for how to set up a stormwater utility. So there's just been a tremendous amount of feedback. There are several communities that are one to your north that is about to begin a feasibility study, and at their pre-proposal meeting they said, we want to follow the Downers Grove model. So I think that speaks to the success of the utility, and largely speaks to the public engagement process and how much the word in terms of what was going on with the utility was presented. So with that, we'd be happy to take any questions and engage in discussion. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much, David. Always good to see you again. As we were chatting before the meeting began, it's probably nice to go through all this effort and actually see it implemented and see the results of it. Sometimes it's a long time in coming, but I'm sure it's rewarding from your professional perspective as well. Well, thank you for all that good news. Why don't I do this is begin with any questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to the proposed ordinance, which would amend our current stormwater utility. And then we'll take questions or comments from the council. Again, this is a workshop item, so we're simply discussing the presentation, and any action would be taken at a later point in time.
Just to clarify, Mayor, too, those are what I'll call housekeeping amendments. They are intended to make the ordinance reflect the practices that have been in place since we launched. So there's no actual change, just just making sure what's written matches the practices we've had in place since the launch.
Thank you. It's a very important clarification. Appreciate that. With that, any questions or comments from any members of the audience? Any questions or comments from members? Oh, hold on. I spoke too soon. Good evening.
Hi, Marjorie, 4720 Florence Avenue. Just wondering how you managed to get 250,000 touches. That's an enormous number. I have trouble believing it, so I'm just questioning that number.
We'll pull that slide back up. Yeah, we'll pull it back up. So,
you count every bill you sent out to everybody as a touch? I mean, it just...
It was before we actually launched the utility and during the first months of the launch. And we pull up the slide here, if we can get it to, there we go. So there's the breakdown of the 250,000 impressions, and we can provide this to you, Marge. But Stormwater Utility webpage, we have 4,900 unique views, 1,300 emails. Here's one of the big ones, was the 4 community-wide notification phone calls during pre-launch and post-launch. Actually, was almost 30,000 impressions right there. Some of the other big hits were water bill inserts. Yes, we did count all the water bill inserts at 16,000 different impressions. So I think you get a flavor for how it adds up to 250,000.
Okay, just seemed... Oh, Downers Grove patch advertising, 27,000.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, it just seemed very excessive, especially knowing how hard we worked to get people in through TCD3 and everything else. That just seemed to be an extremely high number, so I thought I would ask the question. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Other questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Just making sure. Very good. Then I'll bring it back to the council. Commissioner Durkin?
Yeah, thank you. I apologize for that earlier. I guess I was so rambunctious to get this said, so I'll take 2.
That was a test run.
Yeah, it sure was. Actually, I do support the stormwater utility as a way to fund the stormwater management system with fees based on the impact of the system. All properties contribute to the system, and all properties pay for the system that they use. I am sympathetic to the church's concerns that the village has reduced spending on social services and now depends more heavily on the churches to provide for these services, as we have witnessed as a council with the number of presenters that have spoken in the last couple meetings to us. I would like to find a way to support or compensate the churches and the not-for-profits for their role in providing social services. However, I would like to maintain the structure and integrity of the stormwater utility. With that said, I challenge us to find a way to do both. Keep the structure of the utility as developed and support or compensate the churches and nonprofits for their role in providing social services that we had cut. Some of the thoughts that I had in reference to that, I know that we had the grants committee for a while, but without even going to the grants committee, if there was a way that we could look at just having the churches share with us the amount of social services that they provide to our community as a whole, and then somehow come up with a percentage. It's really a topic for a different time. I originally thought, and I've had a number of conversations with our manager about this, about getting the churches exempt from the current system, but there is a use on their part into the system. So I just bring it up because I understand and I hear the churches very loud, but I don't think reducing or taking them out of the program is really in the best interest. So I'd be interested in more thought, and I'm sure there'll be a ton of it, and I appreciate you allowing me to finish up my thought, Mayor. But I just think there's something that we as a collectively, as a unit, can do in recognition of all the cuts that we made years ago, and that the churches and the community responded to.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Neustadt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to kind of back up a little bit and say one thing that I think that we all know, but everybody in our village experiences stormwater and is benefiting from stormwater being removed from our roadways, yards, low-lying areas, backyards, streets, ponds, everywhere. And we've had multiple occasions, including recently, where we had some big storms that caused localized issues of drainage issues, stormwater issues. if you look back over time of where the stormwater utility conversation started many, many years ago, that was in reaction to a lot of these big storms that we had. At different times in the year, different times, different 100-year storms, 50-year storms. I know Commissioner Barnett loves the year storm story. But I think the biggest thing, and Commissioner Durkin just touched on, is that we all benefit from properly funded, properly engineered, and good stormwater infrastructure improvements. This stormwater utility, as Mr. Hyder said, is working. To be within 1% of our expected budget is not only phenomenal, it's awesome that we can be so close on such a new and creative and innovative project here in DuPage County and really in Illinois. For my part, the presentation that we saw tonight really kind of follows along with what we said we were going to do, which is go through the utility, try to get through a 1 year of the process, see where we are with the revenues coming in, see where we are with the projects that we need to go through. And again, we've just identified, I think, 20 more projects on top of our already growing list of stormwater projects that we've just experienced in our last flooding event. The process leading up to the implementation of the stormwater utility included 250,000 contacts. That was public meetings, that was opportunities for not-for-profit groups, for municipal organizations, business leaders, our Chamber of Commerce, the EDC, everybody that we could think of was invited, sometimes even to very specific individualized meetings, so we would all know, residents included, what was coming up. We all knew that there was going to be a new fee. We also all knew that it was going to be on the water bill. We all knew that there was going to be a reduction in the property tax. That message got out. Recently, we have heard from the churches, and I agree with Commissioner Durkin, that they have a new fee. It was a new fee for them. They've never paid property tax before, so they didn't see any savings from the property tax reduction. But I want to be clear that they were part of the original story of this stormwater utility. They had the opportunity to weigh in. I believe we did have a not-for-profit meeting that had an opportunity for churches and other not-for-profits to come and tell us what they thought. But that meant they also had an opportunity to follow along and kind of get ready for this year, maybe budget for it. The social service connection to the churches is huge. We've heard on a number of times, as Commissioner Durkin says, from the church community here at our council, that they offer so many social services that we cannot do. We just are not equipped to offer the services that are out there, which is one of the reasons why we made some of the cuts many years ago. I think that as we go forward with this utility and get through a whole year of the process, a whole year of data, we can understand and start to forecast a little bit better out into the future. Commissioner Durkin's comments about the social service component and how to benefit the churches, I think, is an interesting one. And yes, I agree that there is probably a lot more conversation for that, but I do think that we need to be very cognizant of who delivers those services best and how they can be delivered from which organizations. The questions and the ideas that come into my mind right away is, where do we come up with the dollars to potentially do a change in a funding structure back to the churches? Lastly, I think that as we move forward with our budgeting process and look at 2014 projects and then the fees related to the utility, it's going to be very important to not only use the 2013 storm report, but also look at the history of the projects that we have done and their success. We can show very specifically where we have improved stormwater issues in our town, and if we hadn't had the stormwater utility, the future would be unknown with where that revenue stream would come from. I fully support the utility. I think it's working well. I think if we can get through this budget process and show our residents and our partners and our community that we are financially stable in the revenue sources for this fund, and we can show where the money is going to go for the improvements, we're going to show folks that we do care about our infrastructure and that we do look forward to improving our infrastructure and, more importantly, I probably should have said this in the beginning, maintaining the existing infrastructure. It's a huge commitment in dollars to keep our creeks, our basins, our gutters, everything clear and letting that water get out of our town. So that was kind of a long jumping around comment, not really a question. One question I kind of had, and I wrote it down for Mr. Hyder, is the projection question. You said in some of the other communities the projections are way off. Do you find that's because folks aren't paying in the other communities, or is it a a miscalculation from the GIS, or is there a reason why those calculations could be so far off and we're doing so well, or did we just plan it really well and we got, you know?
Just planning. There's a whole host of reasons. There are utilities where they've had, City of Richmond in Virginia had a tremendous delinquency rate, people not paying the bill, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And there have been, you know, I've seen utilities that, didn't calculate things appropriately, and they had a tremendous number of appeals, and those appeals were successful, and the fees had to be adjusted based on that. I think the fact that you did speak to the public so often and so frequently and out ahead of it really helped with people being prepared and willing to pay the fee and aware that it was coming. But probably, I guess the number one issue that I've seen is just people not paying. Yep.
Thank you. Again, I appreciate this report. I look forward to the next step in our process that we outlined and all that public engagement, which was 2014 budget process will outline the next step as far as the revenue structure goes. And I really appreciate the report tonight and the work gone into it. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Barnett?
Thanks, Mayor. Got some comments, and then I'll wrap it up with a question really addressed to my colleagues. I'm going to be the wet blanket here a little bit. The piece of this that I feel good about is awfully small, and it frankly just has to do with the folks on our team that are actually executing, the ones that are receiving the phone calls, that are managing the GIS, and doing the billing. The fact that we have residents that successfully pay their bills, I suppose that's cause for celebration. It's not necessarily tied terribly to our stormwater plan. The piece that seems to work well is the appeals have been minimal, and the general chaos that some like myself were afraid of was avoided. And I think that's a testament probably to our, our back office folks, not this group, and certainly not the fact that we have a utility. It was only not going to work if we didn't pay bills. That's what we just heard, and our folks pay their bills because they're like that. That's what our residents do. I have several problems that remain, and it may be, I suppose one possible outcome of all this is I just remain in the super minority, but I get my couple of minutes to still talk about it up here. All of this discussion that we've had now for 2 years almost is such an anathema to me. When we talk about everybody benefiting from this, I'm struggling to find the appropriate televised official words to use for that. Because, so does everybody else benefit from snow plowing. Should we change Good Sam's bill a little more because we generally prioritize snow routes to keep that clear? Everybody benefits from a community. But we as a nation, we as a state, we as a community have said for decades that we recognize the public benefit that 501c3 chapter, in particular, organizations provide, and thus we choose not to tax them. And it's not just property tax. They don't pay sales tax either. There's a very definitive, way bigger than this group, way bigger than Downers' great job of the residents paying their bill on stormwater, structure of funding that I really find our departure from that, which is what this is. This is an absolute departure, and we can say it will or will not lead to anything else, nobody knows that, but it's an absolute departure from the philosophy that says government is funded in certain ways, and certain organizations, because of their commitment and contributions to government activities that might otherwise have to be funded by us, are exempt. And my understanding, where I'm leading with this, is my understanding from our discussions to this point has been that the combination of a utility definition and a fee definition, as opposed to a tax definition, was what prevented us from exempting certain organizations. I don't know that that's true. There was some discussion that if we tried to exempt certain organizations early, before we truly rolled it out, that it would sort of derail the whole thing. And I'm certainly not going to pretend that I'm some sort of wiki internet lawyer, but it is absolutely true that there are other communities in this country, I've brought some literature tonight, I'll leave with Enza, that have stormwater utilities that are utilities, that charge stormwater fees that are not taxes, they are fees, and they exempt 501c3s. There are other instances in counties out east where they choose not to use utility and fee, they choose to use a different terminology, and then they assign rates that are to 501c3s at $1. Very intentional recognition of the contributions those organizations make to our community. And when we look back and talk about those things that we've cut and the services they provide, maybe we should find a way to compensate them. This sounds so deja vu about, well, let's get a pile of money together in a grants committee and start deciding amongst the 7 of us who deserves how much of it. It's just, to me, flies in the face of what we have tried to do in the definition of getting lean and focusing on the things we do. It flies in the face of the classical funding of government that has been successful across most venues for decades. I'm just going to read a part, it's 2 sentences, bear with me, this happens to be from Jacksonville's ordinance, but it kind of speaks to this because they actually put it in their ordinance. In recognition of the city of the contributions to the overall benefit and well-being of the community by organizations classified as 501c3 organizations in accordance with the rules of the Internal Revenue Service, a fee reduction in the amount of 100% of the overall stormwater utility charge is authorized. In order to obtain the fee reduction, the organization must blah, 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 blah. So they actually submit and everything else. But the point just remains that this is, I think the numbers were 8%, 5%, something like that, were not-for-profit impervious areas, so there'd be some relationship probably to the total fee collection. I'd really like to ask, and this is where I'm leading, I'm sure you're probably tired of hearing the same things you heard for a year and a half, but I'd like to ask us, as collectively as a group, and part of our further evolution of the stormwater utility, to actually direct our staff, direct our team, to do 2 things. One, figure out exactly what might be available to us within equal protection and application constraints of law to afford such an exemption. That's the first thing. And to secondly, to quantify what that exemption would mean for the balance of the program. Clearly, the program has the support, despite all of the other objections I might raise, of this group, and I can respect that. But I've heard various inputs for the last 6 months, both from the dais and from the audience and from the general public, and they all sort of revolve around this idea that I don't know that anybody's too comfortable with the 501c3 group. That includes our churches who've been the most vocal. But in wrapping up, Mayor, I appreciate your patience. That's what I'm hopeful that as we debate this over the next week or two, in terms of course of action, the changes, the sort of clerical changes that are there, I suspect nobody's going to have any problem with. But I'd like to take some further direction out of this and just figure out specifically what wording might look like and quantify what those changes might be down the road, should we find a way to recognize the contribution to our community that our not-for-profit organizations make. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions from the Council? Commissioner Rankin?
Well, a lot has been covered by my colleagues, but I would say that I don't think there's any harm in investigating and looking into some of the ideas that my fellow colleagues have put forward. The one thing that I would like to see, I think it's wonderful that we have not exceeded our budgets on the incentives and credits. That was something I was worried about, that people would be applying for an incentive or credit and we would have to tell them, no, we're out of money. And that wouldn't be a great feeling after instituting this fee. So I think it might be good to just allow that program to just be either raise it so we're always sure that it's never going to go over budget, or don't put a limit on it because we know pretty much how it's behaving. That's just one thought. We did get a question on the remarks, an individual asking about pools and are they impervious, so maybe we want to just detail that somehow so that question's answered. But I think that was about it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. Like Commissioner Rankin, I don't necessarily want to repeat a lot of what's already been said, but I do support the utility. I think it's working as it's intended to, and I think the staff should be applauded, and the consultant as well, for the fact that we're coming so close to the projections. I think this is another testament to just how good of folks we have here in Downers Grove. I do share Commissioner Durkin's concern about not-for-profits. Having served on the parish council at St. Joseph's, for example, and I can recall looking at the budgets and knowing how tight it is. And as we heard from Deacon Frank Kozar at the last meeting from St. Joe's, there are a certain number of folks that contribute and a certain number of folks that don't, and the burden of this falls disproportionately on the folks that actually do contribute. But along with Commissioner Durkin, I also don't believe that we necessarily should exempt not-for-profits, at least at this point. I think it's something that we need to keep an eye on as we move forward, so that we can look at more and more data and try to quantify the impact on the not-for-profits and see what the reductions in service are. I'm not sure that 8 months worth of data is enough to be able to do that. That being said, I do encourage all the not-for-profits out there to apply for incentives, take steps to work toward credits, and I know the village staff would be happy to work with that, work with any organization that wants to do that. There are ways to mitigate, to a certain extent, the stormwater utility fee, and I hope that the not-for-profits out there will take advantage of that. But the bottom line is we have a lot of infrastructure that we put a lot of money into over the last several years. It needed to be done. More needs to be done. And we have really a fiduciary obligation not only to keep doing those capital projects, but as Commissioner Neustadt said, to maintain what we have. And I know that this council has in the past and will continue to follow through on those responsibilities. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments?
Just want to add something.
Sure, Commissioner Barnett.
I just want to touch on a little bit too of the something else came to me while I was sitting here. The way my experience has been, and it's only 2 churches, and one in Hinsdale, one here. But reality for these folks is they budget as best they can, and I'm speaking specifically to churches. I suspect there's something analogous to, Grove Foundation or whomever else. In churches, it happens to be November through December 31st. So they budget as best they can, and then they work real hard all year long, and they sort of pray that it's all going to come together between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so I just have this problem with some of the dialogue even that's chosen when we say, well, budget for it. Well, yeah, that's what will happen. Sure, they'll budget for it, you bet. And they got to budget for it by selling a couple more widgets over the course of the next 6 months because they got the next promotion in line. They're going to budget for it by pulling the reins back and hoping they pull it together between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so the idea of somehow asking them to quantify for us their value to the community, sort of prove up your worth, it's 501c3 category, guys. They've proven that worth. And I don't think it's reasonable to ask them to quantify it and then somehow say, well, rebate some portion of what you quantify for us. And then lastly, I'm apologizing in advance, Mayor, because you probably won't like the comment, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Somebody explain to me, with all the logic we just heard for the last 15 minutes, why we don't have a street utility. I know it's a little bit of a smart-ass comment, and I apologize, but it's where my head is right now, and
Why don't we pay for water through property taxes?
Yeah, it's a fair question.
Then churches wouldn't have to pay for water either. Put it on the backs of the residential property owners, and we could do that too.
You could do that.
Do lots of things.
But the structures beyond Downers are pretty well known and pretty consistent. So I'm done. I thank you for the patience, Mayor.
No worries. It's workshop.
Don't forget Easter, though.
You lost me there, Commissioner.
Thanksgiving is
I knew where we were going.
All right. I was thinking of the budget calendar.
I don't know.
Thank you for the discussion, because obviously this is something that has been a community discussion, as has been noted, for over 10 years. We've been talking about this for a decade plus. So the history, I think, is always worthwhile. And there's really 2 things that we're talking about here. One touches upon the philosophy of whether to pay for stormwater maintenance and infrastructure through something other than property taxes, which is obviously a conversation that we had, and ultimately the majority decided that this was the progressive way to go forward. And yes, it's a departure, although I suggest that sometimes making a departure from the way things are traditionally done can be a good thing. And I'm heartened by the fact that communities seem to be wanting to move towards this, not taking utilities for, say, water and going back to property taxes. I don't know of any instances of where a community like Downers would decide, well, we have water and we charge not-for-profits for water. That is basically a utility, it's an enterprise fund. Let's instead pay for water through property taxes, spread it all out on the pie chart that we saw, and then we can exempt all not-for-profits. And that would actually reduce their burden because now they wouldn't have to pay for water. And I'm exaggerating, we're all using some different examples, but it's all about philosophy. Do we change the philosophy in how we pay for stormwater maintenance and infrastructure? But let me take a few steps back. First of all, it has always been the case, it has been the indisputable case that we have significant stormwater maintenance and capital needs. And if anybody wasn't clear on that before April 17th and 18th of 2013, everybody understands that now. No question about it. So it has not been a question of whether we have something to pay for, it's how do we go about paying for it. And we had the philosophy approach earlier about whether we do it through the traditional property tax method, which is the way it's traditionally done, or do we take a departure and try it a different way that has pros and cons to it, just like anything else. But does this work better for our community? And the ultimate philosophical decision was that this was a better approach in terms of how to do it, which is why we're doing it. The other thing I just want to point out that whether you agreed or disagreed with the philosophy of going this route, I think everybody should be congratulatory with the implementation process because they hadn't done this before. Nobody's done it in DuPage County before us. Sounds like some people may be doing it soon. And there's a lot of credit to a lot of different people for making sure that process went as smoothly as it did. And there's a lot of hard work that went into that. And I would suggest, yes, paying your bill is important, but there was a lot of other aspects that went into that, including the tremendous community outreach that took place. In terms of the philosophy, back when we were having this conversation, one of the challenges that I always struggled with was, well, okay, what's our alternative? If we don't pay for this through a utility, then the only thing I ever heard suggested was that we just do it the way we'd always done it, and that would mean in order to raise the funds that we need to meet those challenges that we have, again, which are unquestioned, means we raise property taxes. And that means that pie chart and that disparity that you saw starts to go up, where you see that a greater and greater segment of our community is carrying more and more of the water, no pun intended, than ever before. And I don't think that most people, when they looked at that pie chart, felt too good about it either. So my point is, in terms of the philosophy, yes, there's always been pros and cons. This is the departure that we made. It's working. It's working in terms of generating the funds that it is intended to. It's working in the sense that it is now spreading out the cost of maintaining infrastructure and capital stormwater projects amongst a broader group of payers, which then, of course, circles back to the next question, which is what changes, if any, should be made going forward in terms of that philosophy. Because, yes, part of the change in philosophy, the change in approach, means including more payers than you traditionally did. And those include not-for-profits. And by squinting at the pie chart that was up on the screen, the not-for-profit portion was about 8.7%, and if my math is even remotely close, it's about $300,000 a year that comes from the not-for-profit segment. Not an insubstantial amount of money, and if we took that out of there, that would mean probably a project or two that we wouldn't be able to do. 8.77, excuse me. Close. So then the question becomes, do we basically take that 8.77%, almost 9%, and just apply it back to everybody else in some way? Yeah, you could do that. And one of the things that I know Mr. Hyder would tell you about stormwater utilities is that it's like ice cream. There are a lot of different flavors. And some places just simply say, we're going to just charge everybody $1. I don't care who you are, and that's it. And other places will have 9 categories of a different type of property. Some will have 3. You can do it a lot of different ways. So sure, you can exempt all kinds of places. You can exempt commercial and industrial if you wanted to. Might not get you where you want to be. Kind of defeats the purpose of the philosophy, but sure, you could do that. My question is, are we talking about faith-based organizations, or are we talking about all not-for-profits? Because the voice that we've heard the loudest from are the faith-based organizations who have put forth the argument that's been made by and reflected up here by a couple people that, well, when the village cut its social services, we as faith-based organizations took over a need within the community that was previously being funded, for lack of a better word, by the village. And That's partially correct. I also recall the discussion of many of my colleagues up here that it wasn't necessarily faith-based organizations or community that absorbed this, but there were other organizations in existence in the county already providing services that maybe they would pick this up. So I don't know how that plays into this. So I don't think it's a question of trying to force every not-for-profit organization to prove their worth. I think it's a question of how do you tie that back? Which not-for-profits? Which ones are providing services that might otherwise be funded by Downers Grove? Gets into a lot of different questions, which I'm certainly not prepared to answer at this point. So my concern is in terms of an alternative. I think the approach that we're taking is working. It's working well. Sure, there are still things that people are going to say, well, you know, I would rather pay property taxes because I made out better under the old system. I get that. That's always going to be the case. But you don't see people going away from this. You see people going towards this. This is a departure, I think, for all the reasons that were mentioned earlier, is the more progressive approach, the more logical, equitable, egalitarian approach. And we're hearing about how communities are looking at our model in terms of how they're going to go about solving their own stormwater issues. So I see us as leaders on the cutting edge when it comes to this, not someone who wants to go back to ways that had their own problems. The philosophies in terms of how you deal with the tax-exempt organizations, and all of us up here have been intimately involved with multiple not-for-profits. It's the Walk-In Ministry of Hope, or it's a church board, or whatever it is. We've all done it. And they all have tight budgets, there's no question about it. What I would rather do is, if this council is serious about trying to, I don't think exempting the exempts would be the way to go about doing it. I think we ought to look at how can we encourage another piece of our program to include them as continued participants in the system, which I think is appropriate, no different than they pay for water right now. And of course we know who governs the prices of that, and at least we control this. Can we be creative in different types of credits or incentives that might even achieve more of the goals of the overall program in terms of awareness, in terms of responsibility, in terms of changing habits, in terms of managing construction projects? I know we're going to be going to the next room a little bit, and one of the proposed medium priority action items that we have on the table are considering amendments to stormwater management regulations to be more restrictive in Downers Grove than what the county currently requires. Well, those changes come at a cost, and when churches do projects or not-for-profits do projects, complying with more restrictive stormwater requirements for detention are going to cost money. Maybe a lot more money than what a utility is costing them. Is there some way to tie these things in so that maybe we relieve the benefit, the burden there a little bit more than exempting them from the overall system? So I am not at all insensitive to the comments we've heard from the audience with respect to the burden on not-for-profits. Like I said, let's face it, they weren't paying anything before, now they're paying something. So of course they'd prefer the old system. I get that. Is there some way to both encourage the type of outcomes that we want while keeping them in the program and ameliorating the impact upon those organizations in a way that isn't unfair to others whose I don't want to say behavior because we're not trying to regulate behavior, but who else we want to motivate to follow better practices with respect to stormwater management, maybe reaching some of those more restrictive goals that we're considering implementing in our own ordinance. How can this all be tied together? That's kind of where I would like to go, and I don't have an answer for that, but as we continue to discuss and debate this, I think that there may be some innovative solutions that we can come up with that would help address this issue, and I don't think it's going to make it go away. I'm not going to suggest that for a second, but it might help ameliorate the situation and give those who weren't paying, who now are, maybe some better sense of control over their own destiny, and then along the way contribute to what our overall goals are for the total stormwater management program. I don't think that's too far of a stretch. I know I'm big on ideas right now and small on details, but we'll get to the details. So that's just on that point. The other thing I want to just talk about with respect to the changes that are being proposed. I understand that the changes that are being proposed in the ordinance right now are basically to match our practices, how we're actually managing the program now, and obviously I'm in support of that. couple things to think about is in terms of perhaps some additional changes. And one of these I know I've mentioned before. In terms of applying for an appeal, some of the comments I've heard is that, gosh, I don't really want to pursue an appeal because the cost of applying for an appeal is more than what I'm going to get in savings if I win the appeal, or it's just not worth it.
We did double check that, Mayor, and there are no application fees for appeals or incentives, only for the credits.
Okay, so then there's that issue. Then let's turn right to the credits. Thank you for interrupting me. One idea would be, because I know that the question was there ought to be some application fee for a credit, because we just didn't want everybody willy-nilly applying for a credit when it was unlikely they were going to get it. So there need to be some offense that one would have to get over to prove that they would be serious about it. But this along the same lines, if the fee for a credit were returned, if the person was successful in obtaining that credit, that might provide the fence so that people only pursue it who are serious about it. And yet, if the benefit of your credit doesn't wipe out the cost of the fee. Some things like that we want to think about. So that would actually it wouldn't encourage frivolous requests for credits, but it wouldn't penalize someone who was probably deserving of a credit. And again, we're trying to encourage certain conduct as part of overall better stormwater management. That might even be a better incentive, because if you apply for credit, you get the credit, and then you get your application fee back. That might even be another way of helping out a little bit. And then just going back, whether it's in the non-for-profit context or not, I think we probably should give some thought to maybe different types or additional types of credits and incentives that would continue to encourage the types of outcomes for the program that we ultimately want in terms of stormwater best management practices and outcomes. And if we can tie that in some way to proposed increased restrictive requirements in our own stormwater ordinance, I think there might be some possibilities there. So no more than just some sharing of ideas and some food for thought as we move forward. And I also agree that as we get more information like this is very helpful. We're still very kind of early in the game here. Although I don't suspect that there will be big differences the next time we see a report. We don't even have a full year experience under our belt. But I think this is very helpful information in terms of trying to have this conversation and maybe look at some other options that we might have for potential modifications. Other comments or questions from the council about this item, Commissioner Barnett?
Yeah, just your kind of instant replay analogy program makes a lot of sense to me. If there was, because that is a concern, irrespective of the tax exempt question. You hate to have a situation where people are disincentivized from the behavior that we're frankly hoping to incentivize purely by the cost of evaluations. That makes a lot of sense. I think if you started ticking off the non-numerical attributes here of some sort of a more equitable split, some sort of a more predictable revenue stream, some sort of an increased awareness and education, some sort of incentivized behavior, I guess I would argue that all those things remain in place. And then including the radically reduced or increased total revenue, even if those tax exempts are taken out. I mean, obviously I know everybody knows where I stand, but all those other goals that are not so purely numerical are still likely hit, perhaps to an 8.7% lesser degree by some different split between the other three. But all of those goals remain effectively accomplished should there be an exemption for tax exempt parcels. So it's not I don't know that the idea of entertaining that idea somehow diminishes any of the balance of the program. So just so keep that in mind too.
No, I don't disagree with that. My suggestion is again, this will come no surprise. I think that the decision to include all the participants that we have decided to include is the wiser choice. But I think that there are things that we can do that will help ameliorate the impact, which is really what we're hearing about. We're hearing, and specifically what's been echoed by a number of my colleagues, is that it was more pointedly faith-based organizations having picked up responsibility for services that might otherwise be funded by Downers Grove because we changed how we did business. And there's a nexus there that kind of troubles me, because how do how do you establish that nexus? I mean, I don't know how you do that.
No, I agree with
And I'm not going to ask anybody to do it either, so I don't know how to do that. So it would really be, you're either going to exempt some or all, I mean, none or all. And my personal view is, let's get to the root of the problem, which is how do we help them help themselves ameliorate the impact? And along the way, we might even incentivize some of that kind of best management practices behavior in terms of stormwater. And again, I don't have any specifics at my fingertips. The only one I had was if you apply for a credit and you succeed, that you get your application fee back, which will actually incentivize more of that type of behavior. But maybe more things like that we can think of. That's all.
Just a quick comment about that, returning the application fee for the credit. It seems to me that we have a fee structure for reviewing plans and applications, and returning an application fee kind of goes against our normal planning and review process for other departments and issues in our village where our staff time is valuable, and we equate our fees with the review time and the application of our stormwater engineer having to go out and take a look at that credit. So it's definitely up for a conversation, but I would just be cautious with that one a little bit. I totally understand the incentivizing of returning the fee, but it steers away from some of our other fee structure.
Fair point, and I would argue this is a little bit different because we are trying to incentivize certain conduct, and the end result of getting the credit is actually someone having done someone that's designed to reduce stormwater impact, which is what this is all about. But fair point. Fair point. Other questions or comments on this topic?
Yeah, I just have a comment. You know, in light of what I had brought up was, you know, a number of communications, conversations that Dave and I have had with our one-on-ones and just casual conversation. And instead of just sitting here saying, you know what, the churches were a segment of our community that I personally overlooked when I had voted on this and we discussed it collectively, and then all of us voted in favor of it. Instead of just saying, you know what, I don't like what we've done to the churches, I hear them. I didn't want to just say, you know what, let's abolish the stormwater utility fee. So that's where I've come up with, through conversations with others in the community and with Dave and staff, if there's a way that we could develop a credit back. So instead of saying, you know what, we missed the, whatever the percentage is, I can't see that far, the tax exempts, and saying, you know, let's just vote, let's just abolish this ordinance, this utility. I don't want to do that. I wanted to keep it how it is, but find a way that we could credit back. So I just want to clarify that.
Find a way to credit back.
Credit back whatever part of the services that we gave to them, or through the education credits, or however we come up with. I don't want to take away, because I truly believe the need for this. I think it would have been a different area if we could go back and talk about, you know, how the real impact, or what we as a council, previous council, put on to the community to take up those services that we eliminated.
So if I understand it correctly, Sean, you're saying that, let's say St. Joe's does so much community service, Meals on Wheels, whatever that they do, that may, you know, if your concept went forward, that may give them 10% off their stormwater fee?
No,
Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I'm not saying, I don't want to take the stormwater utility fee, because that's an avenue that we have to bond for. You know, I see I know the need, I see the need, I know how it is going to be applied for future stormwater utility projects through the bonding, so, and it all comes back to our rating. It's just an idea that I had, that instead of saying, you know what, I think we need to acknowledge the impact on the nonprofit faith worship, and saying no, instead of saying no to it, maybe there's a way that we collectively could work together, or staff could develop, or we can talk with the consultant to find out what other communities have done. I don't know. I just want to I hope I'm clarifying it. Because I could easily have said, you know, I agree with Bob, and, you know, let's just vote no on it, and maybe we'll pick up another vote, and all of a sudden it's 4-3, and we're not accomplishing what I think we need to, which is we have the dire need for this utility. I mean, it is the way of the future. I mean, we see it with the county. You know, I just Googled stormwater utility fees, and there's 20-some pages of municipalities throughout the country that have it, with various stages. And I think 90% of them you worked on, Dave. But it was just a thought that I had.
Only the successful ones.
You know, staff heard a lot of important comments from the council tonight. One of them is to try to be creative, try to address these issues. It's come up in a variety of ways, and I remember Mr. Hyder telling us several months ago that one of the first ways that our program would evolve is in the credit and incentive. It would become more complex, it would become more sophisticated, and we'll come up with something that meets the needs of our community. And that's really what I'm taking away from this conversation. So it's kind of a challenge, talked about last week, instead of or, try to find the and solutions. And so we'll get back to work on that, and in a couple of weeks we'll come up with some ideas. We'll answer Commissioner Barnett's questions, we'll answer Commissioner Durkin's questions and others, and we'll put forward some ideas that we might want to consider moving forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Olson?
I don't want to rehash what's already been said.
Go ahead.
And I'm not going to. My concern specifically is we hear a lot from the not-for-profits. We've heard from a number of the churches. The group we have not heard from, a group that I think could be vocal, and a group that's talked to me privately, are people who believe that everyone should pay their fair share, whether you're a not-for-profit, a business, or a residential property. And there are people out there, and they may not be at this podium, but they certainly have approached me on this issue with that opinion. And I think we do need to keep that in mind.
Sure.
That this group may not be as vocal because they're pleased with the current structure.
Well, right, the guy whose body taxes went down in a greater degree than his fee is pretty happy, and he's probably not at the podium complaining.
Correct. And that's sort of my point is, I'm absolutely open and support ideas and thinking about how we can change credits, how we can change incentives. But my largest concern in doing so is that we reduce this pie. This pie gets reduced in some sense that then just to maintain the current level of service, we are forced to increase the fee. And from my conversations with members of the community, increasing the fee at large percentages is something that is frankly anathema to large segments of the community, and I would worry if we make major changes that reduce this pie, that we're going to have to squeeze that money from somewhere else. And so I just want to raise that concern. I'm absolutely open. I don't want to be seen as being dismissive of the concerns of the not-for-profits, the concerns of the churches, and I recognize those, but I also believe it's very important that we maintain this pie and not have to force a large increase.
Well, and just to pick up on that, and I know Commissioner Barnett, you want to speak to it as well, and that was kind of where I was going, is it's not just exempt somebody completely so they're not contributing anymore, because you're right, part of the benefit of going about it this way is you spread the cost out over more payers. Let's face it, that's one of the benefits of this approach. But if we can look at incentives and things that actually incentivize whomever it is on that pie, I'm not limiting this to the non-for-profits, because I think we need to be fair and equitable to everybody. You can't just start treating people like that. That causes them to take certain steps or certain actions that we've recognized as having a value. And again, I'm not going to try to quantify what that is. That might be a little bit easier because, yes, if you do X, then we get Y. Hey, you know what, that's actually something that we all benefit from, and we're elevating everyone's behavior, we're elevating best practices. And again, I'm being very general because that's at the level at which this concept is right now. So we're not taking people out of the pie. I get your question completely, and I think you're right, Commissioner. There are also people that have come up and said, yeah, I think this is a much fairer way to go about, and I think it's people contribute, stormwater should contribute to the cost of managing it. They just don't typically come up to the podium and say that. So we should be mindful of that. But let's figure out if there's a way to, again, be creative with incentives and credits, and not to take things out so much, but to take it to another level, if you will. The and that Mr. Fieldman's talking about, and be lucky that we stop at and we're not asking for all.
We draw the limit at and.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Commissioner Barnett?
there's, that idea that everybody thinks everybody ought to pay their fair share is universally true. It transcends the stormwater discussion. I mean, you know, we're about to do $25 million worth of street work over the next year and a half or 2 years. I'm pretty sure that people think everybody ought to pay their fair share of the street work too, but we're not going to approach funding it this way. The pie is going to result in a big number at already, what's $3.5 million at current pace, something like that. So you're talking about $3.5 million of new revenue. It's no different than any other budgeting question, the one we're going to face in a few minutes in the other room. If you had $300,000 less, you'd either raise taxes $300 more, or you'd do $300,000 less work in the current budget year. We're about to do that same thing on streets. We do it every year with sidewalks. This question is not so much about trying to make sure, the question for me about tax exempts is not so much about trying to make sure everybody pays their fair share, because I don't know anybody in practically the country that doesn't think to some degree that ought to be the case. It's the issue of structure and expectations and planning and how do we fund government. It's just it's a philosophical question. I'm clearly in the minority on. I can live with that. Well, I'll move on. But it's not a question of fair share for me, because there isn't a church. If you wanted to define fair share, take a run at defining it. Good luck. But there isn't, on the basis of funding the services the community provides, there isn't a church in town that pays their fair share, or a 501c3 that pays their fair share, because there's $44 million of operating not getting picked up from any of those guys. So that for me, that argument's a little bit borders on academic nuttiness. Going forward, we're going to get $3.5 million or $3.2 million or $4.5 in three years out from now, whatever it is. I'm really uncomfortable with it, so I'll shut up now. Thanks, Mayor.
Thanks. Well, the only other alternative I've ever talked about is just raise property taxes for everybody else, which I'm uncomfortable with.
Well, no, but
What's the other option?
The utilities going forward, but you made the comment, and I'm going to paraphrase badly, we can't just start changing the rules for different people. Well, yeah, you can. In fact, we do on a day-in and day-out basis of every sales tax dollar that we generate or levy in the city. We do, actually, on a unit basis.
You can't change it if one of your selling points is it's more equitable and egalitarian. You could, as I mentioned earlier, you have a flavor of ice cream in some places where they just pick a number out of a hat and charge everybody that. And if you want a piece of property,
look at the pie charts. It's still more equitable. You've still made a substantial shift in revenue sources.
Agreed.
With or without the tax exempt portion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But again, we can engage in all kinds of academic nuttiness and play around with the pie chart.
Right, and either way, green or no green, you're more equitable and more spread across away from the residential taxpayers.
Not as much. But anyway, you're right. It's a philosophical difference of opinion. So I know you were trying to wrap this up earlier. I think now we're at that point. But obviously, we'll continue the conversation. So what is, actually, that's a good point for those keeping score at home. What is the next step in terms of when we will be revisiting this again?
At our next meeting, there'll be consideration of the ordinance amendments, and that'll also give us an opportunity to update on the questions that were asked. Staff sees these questions and policy discussions playing out through the budget season and then on to future years of this utility. So we do expect conversations and tweaks as we go.
Thank you. And I agree with, I don't forget who said it earlier, is that we said when we started down this path that we would have these milestones where we would stop and have these conversations, and that's exactly what we're doing. So I'm very glad to have the robust conversation again, because this is exactly what we promised the community we would do. So, thank you.
That ends our first reading tonight, Mayor. Thank you very much.
That brings us to item 10 on our agenda, the mayor's report. I have no report tonight, so that brings us to item 11, our manager's report. Mr. Fieldman?
No report tonight, Mayor.
Thank you. Brings us to item 12, our attorney's report. Madam Attorney, Ms. Petrarca?
Thank you, Mayor. Only one item to present this evening, and that is an ordinance amending the stormwater utility provisions. That is all.
Thank you very much. Brings us to item 13, council member new business. Do any members of the village council have any new items of business or items of new business, that too, that they would like to present to the council tonight? Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. One of the things that we heard about on the Plan Commission while I served there, and we've heard about here on the Village Council for some time, is when a new project is going on, I didn't hear about this, or I heard about it word of mouth, why didn't somebody tell me about this? And I think some of that is rooted in some of the larger projects that have been proposed and being close to residential neighborhoods. And some of that is rooted in state law and the requirement that property owners within 250 feet be notified. Downers Grove has never been about just doing the minimum of what's required, and so I'd like to expand what it is that we require. So I'd like to ask staff to define a neighborhood for the purpose of the notification that would go out when there's a new commercial, industrial, or large residential project that goes into or close to a residential neighborhood. And I have sort of a 1,000-foot number in mind, but I'm not wedded to it. But what I'd like to do is ask staff to really investigate what it is that other communities do, other states do, and try to find the best way to notify everyone who would be legitimately impacted by a development that's close to their residential property that's maybe not in keeping with a residential development. So as I said, I'm thinking of businesses, whether it's commercial, industrial, or large residential projects, multifamily residential projects. I'd like to thank folks for having conversations with me one-on-one to try to flesh out the idea. It's been kicking around in my head for quite some time, and I know it's been something that others have been concerned about. And so I'd like to ask the council for the ability to direct staff to investigate this, and hopefully it'll come together and it's something we can do with the new zoning code rewrite.
And since we're already working on our update to our zoning code, and it's a comprehensive update, this issue of changes to notification requirements would come up anyway, and we already are discussing and will discuss it, and we'll approach it in a manner consistent with some long-range planning initiatives of always be improving resident engagement and communication. So we'll take that as general direction, and we'll make sure that the Planning Commission considers that, and then ultimately the council in the coming months.
Thank you, Commissioner Jose. Does anyone in the council disagree with the action item that Mr. Fieldman just described taking place?
Can I compliment him?
Yes?
I would just want to compliment Greg for bringing this up, because this really got some legs when he was the chairman of the Planning Commission and the SLIF was being proposed for the 63rd Street area. There's only a select few homes because of the footage that got word, actual documentation of such project, and I think this is a great idea, and I really like the fact that it ties in nicely with our review already, so I truly support this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Hearing no objections voiced by any member of the council present, I think you have direction to proceed as you described, Mr. Fieldman.
Thank you.
And thank you for raising an item of new business, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor.
Any other items of new business from any members of the Village Council? Hearing none. That brings us to item 14 on our agenda, which is a motion to adjourn, but we will be adjourning next door to the committee room to continue our conversation on long-range planning. This is our third meeting on long-range planning, and we will pick up where we left off, and I would invite everyone here who would like to join us next door in the committee room for a discussion. We will be, I think, focusing, among other things, on the high, medium, and low priority action items. So with that introduction, do I have a motion to adjourn to the long-range planning meeting? So moved. Second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Neustadt?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?